Good morning and welcome to week 2 of distant learning. I'm hoping you're all doing well and have had a great weekend. Today, I just wanted to make a couple comments about last week's assignments. You guys did an awesome job. I had some really good, thoughtful emails from you. Hopefully, you're looking at my private comments on Google Classroom. And today, we're going to start the next lesson. It's actually on 2.3, and we're going to be writing equations in slope-intercept form. And I'm really glad that we already talked about a little bit of this before we left for our break. All right, so we already talked about how you want to make sure your equations are written in this format. So y equals mx plus or minus b. So when you get it into this format, you know that the number, or this letter m in front of the x, stands for your slope. And this b means your y-intercept, or where your graph for your equation is going to cross the y-axis. All right, so sometimes you're going to be given the equations that are already in that format, and there'll be a bunch of those in your homework today. So if you see an equation that's already in this format, here's one, for instance, y equals negative 4x minus 2. And if you're just asked to give the slope and the y-intercept, you can see them right there. So for this one, the slope would be this negative 4 right here. So that is your slope, negative 4 over 1, really. Okay, and you can just say negative 4. And then the y-intercept is this number. So be careful, if there's a plus sign right here, it's a positive 2. In this case, your y-intercept is negative 2. So if you were looking on your graph, you know two things. Your slope is negative, so you know that your line will go up and over towards the left. And you also know that the graph is going to be crossing through the y-axis below the 0 at negative 2. So you can kind of picture that, how that would look. So if this, were your graph, you are going to have a y-intercept of negative 2, and you know your slope is going to go up and that over that direction is negative 4. Okay, so I'd like to just give you another example of what you would do if your equation is not already solved for y. So in some of the homework problems, you're going to be asked to find the slope and the y-intercept. But if you look at this equation, it's not in the format you want it. So you first have to solve it for y. So if you look here, we would add 1 to both sides of this equation. And so what we have is y equals negative 2/3 x plus 1. Okay, so now it's solved for y, and now it's easy to see what the slope would be and what the y-intercept would be. So if the directions just ask you to give those two things, first make sure that it's set up in this format, and then you can see the slope would be right here. So negative 2/3 is your slope, and your y-intercept is at the positive 1. So let's go ahead and graph that. All right. So once you rewrite your equation to y equals negative 2/3 x plus 1, you're ready to go ahead and graph this. All right, so what I did, and this is kind of a little refresher also, when some of you were graphing in the last assignment, you weren't quite sure what numbers to pick for your x. So you want to look here at the slope, the number that's in front of the x. And since it's a fraction with a 3 on the bottom, you want to pick multiples of 3. You want to pick multiples of the denominator. Okay, so you already know that 0 is the easiest one to start with. So if I put 0 in here for x, 0 times negative 2/3 is 0, but then plus the 1 would give you 1 for y. So 0, 1 would be a point on your line. Okay, then if you pick 3 for x, you end up having negative 2/3 times your 3, okay? And the reason we do this is so that we can eliminate having fractions. And you'll get negative 2 plus the 1, so don't forget the rest of your equation, negative 2 plus 1, and you'll get negative 1 for y. So your next point would be 3, negative 1, okay? And then finally, I'm going to pick negative 3 because you might as well pick the negative 3. It's also a multiple of 3. And that's just going to change this right here then to a positive 2 plus 1 gives you 3. So your next point would be at negative 3, positive 3. So there is the graph of your equation. And we can talk about a couple of things now. You know you have a negative slope, which is negative 2/3. So if I start at this point, I can go up 2, which is positive, but then I've got to show something negative, and you go to the left 3. Up 2, left 3. So there's your negative 2/3 slope. Or going down, down 2, that'd be negative 2. To the right 3 is positive 3. So whether the negative is in with the 2 or the 3, the whole fraction is negative 2/3. Okay, and you can see from your graph also that our y-intercept is positive 1. Well, there's where your graph crosses the y-axis at the plus 1. Now, the next bit of our lesson is to talk about the x-intercept, or where your graph would cross the x-axis. There are 2 ways to figure this out. Okay, the first way is to graph this, and at this point, you can see where your graph crosses the x-axis. It's right about right here, okay? And that's going to be between the 1 and the 2 at 1.5. The easier way to do this is actually just to go ahead and stick 0 in for y. So we're going to go back to this equation, and I'm not putting 0 in for x. I'm going to put 0 in for y. Whenever you do that, think about this. If you put 0 in for y, that will give you the x amount, which is where your graph is going to cross the x-axis. All right, so 0 would go in for y, so it's going to give you something 0. So something 0 means it's going to land somewhere on the x-axis here. So my 0 equals negative 2/3 x plus 1. All right. So if I subtract 1 from each side, I get negative 1 equals negative 2/3 x. And then you would divide each side by negative 2/3, which really is multiplying by negative 3/2. So finally, you get x equals, this is negative times negative, you get a positive 3/2, which is 1 1/2. Okay, so this is going to be 1 1/2 or 1.5. So right here is 1.50, right there. So your x-intercept is going to be at the 1.5. Okay, and if you give the real location, it is going to be 1.5 comma 0. So there are some examples in the book you can also look at to help you find the x-intercept. Finding the y-intercept first is kind of nice and easy, and you can travel along your graph using your slope to see where your line would cross the x-axis. Okay, or simply just put 0 in for y and you'll solve for x. You'll figure out what the x amount is. All right, hope this is helpful. Stop into my Zoom conference any morning from 10 to 11. Send me emails, and I will have a follow-up video in a day or two after this, to go over these questions. All right, have a great day.